Hello, welcome to Meeplecare. My name is Nicolas and today I would like to show you how to set up and play Intarsia. Intarsia is a game for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, that plays in about 40 to 60 minutes. The game is designed by Kiesling and it's published by Pegasus Spiele, and there's also a Dutch version of the game that's published by 999 Games. Now, before I invite you to the Café de Paris, I would kindly ask you to hit the like and subscribe button. Welcome to the Café de Paris. There are no customers in today. The café is closed because it is in dire need of some renovations. Especially the valuable parquet floor needs to be replaced. This delicate job may only be performed by the best craftsmen, so a contest has been organized. If you manage to build the most valuable floor, embellished with a lot of these Intarsias, you might become the winner of the contest and get the permission to redesign the floor of the Café de Paris. During this competition, each player is given a floorboard. Over a period of 3 rounds, you will take turns. On your turn, you may buy one wood element and add it to your floor. You will need to pay for these elements with material cards, and then you will arrange those wooden elements on your board in a specific pattern. Each time when you have added a wood element, you will check to see if you can claim one of these tool cards, and if you may draw new material cards. At the end of each round, when all players have passed, you will score points for your connectors. And at the end of the third round, during the final scoring, you will also score points for all the ornaments that you have created. The more wooden components that you have added to your ornaments, the more points each ornament will score you. At the end of the game, the player with the most points is the winner of Intarsia. Now, before I take you through each phase of the game, let's start by setting up the game, and in this example, I will set up the game for 2 players. But of course, I will also tell you how you set up the game for the other player counts. Place the scoreboard in the middle of the table. This is the score track. After each player has chosen a color of scoring marker, you can place those markers on the 0 spot of this track. In the box you will find these 2 light brown markers. Place one of them on the first spot of this round track, and this will be your round marker. Place the second marker on the space with the arrow on this reward track. This is now your reward marker. Next up, you place this tool board next to the scoreboard. You have to fill up the empty spaces on the tool board with these tool tiles that you can find in the box. When you take a look at the back of these tiles, you will be able to sort them into 3 different decks. You have a 2-player deck, a 3-player deck, and a 4-player deck. Since we are setting up for a 2-player game, you will only use this deck. For a 3-player game, you would add this deck to the 2-player deck. And in a 4-player game, you use all the tool tiles. I will explain in a minute how you will use these tool tiles during the game, but to place them on the tool board, you first have to look at this tool symbol in the top right corner of the tile. And then you will have to match it with a tool symbol at the top of a column. You now know that you will have to place this tile in this column because the symbols match, but to determine the exact spot of that tile in the column, you will have to look at the ornaments on the tile. There will be a match for those ornaments in that column. So now I know that I have the matching tool symbol and the matching ornament, so I can place that tool tile on this position. For your 2-player game, you will place 1 tool tile on each space of the board. But in a 3 and a 4-player game, there can be up to 2 tiles on 1 space, because they both match the tool symbol and the ornament. If this is the case, you can place both tiles on the same space, one on top of the other. If there is a difference in the point value, you place the tile with the higher point value on top of the other one. These are the material cards. All cards have the same back, but when you look at the front of the cards, you will be able to arrange them into 5 decks according to their color. This 5th deck has wild cards. They will match any of the 4 colors. You place these decks face up within reach of all players. You will use these to pay for the wood elements. Speaking of which, let's take a closer look at these wooden elements and their setup. First up are these frames. They come in one of the 4 material colors. Depending on the player count, you might have to remove a number of these frames. For your 2-player game, you remove 4 frames per color. For a 3-player game, you remove 2 frames per color, and in a 4-player game, you will use all the frames. You can then place these 4 stacks of colored frames within reach of all players. Now you might have already noticed that a lot of the game's mechanisms and components work with the 4 colors of the game. If you or some of your fellow players have any difficulty to tell the colors apart, you can look at the icons that the game uses for each of those 4 colors on the board, the material cards and the tool cards. For yellow, it's this diamond. For red, it's a hexagon. For green, a square. And for violet, it's a circle. Now the colored frames don't have these symbols, and that's why during setup, instead of placing them in a supply like we just did, you can place them next to the toolboard, matching the color of the ornaments on the tools in that row. For example, all the ornaments on the tools in this first row are yellow. Yellow has a diamond icon, and as such you can find that icon on each of these tiles in this row, and of course on the yellow cards and on your player board. So you can place the yellow frames next to this row so that everyone knows that this is a yellow diamond frame. If you have a lot of space on your table, you can choose to leave the frames in the box in their matching spot and place the box on the table. Again, the yellow frames are placed next to this diamond icon and can be easily identified. The same goes for these red, green and violet frames. The other wooden components are placed in a supply within reach of all players. We have the midsections, the core elements, the tables and the connectors. Now each player takes a floorboard that matches the color of their scoring marker. And together they should decide if they want to play on the A side or the B side. For your first play, you should use the A side. No matter which side you choose, all players have to use the same side. During this teach, I will show you how to play on the A side of the board, but of course, at the end of the rules teach, I will also teach you the B side of the board. Now each player takes one of these connector pieces and places it in the center of their board on the matching space. In the box you will also find these 50-point scoring tokens. You can place those in the center of the scoring track. To finish setup, take the 5 starting hand cards and place the cards showing the 5 pairs next to the scoreboard in a resting area. Shuffle the other 4 cards and give each player one at random. Any spare cards are then also placed into the resting area. We are now finally ready to start playing. As I already mentioned, the game is played over 3 rounds. Each round comprises of the following 3 phases. First, we have a preparation phase, in which you gather new material cards. Then we have the main phase of the game, the building phase. During this phase, you will take turns to buy and build new wood elements. You finish a round with the conclusion phase. After 3 rounds, the game ends and it's time for the final scoring. Now, let's take a look at each of these phases in detail, starting with the preparation phase. During setup, each player has been dealt a starting hand card. On each card you can see a combination of material cards and wild cards. You now take all the cards that you can see on your starting hand card from the material decks. This will be a combination of 8 or 9 material cards of certain colors and 1 or 2 of these wild cards that can be used as any color. So here I would take 4 green cards, 3 yellow cards, 2 red cards and 1 wild card. you take those cards into your hand, and these will be the resources that you can use to buy the wooden elements. You also repeat this step at the start of the second and the third round. At the start of those rounds, it's possible that you also have a few leftover material cards from a previous round. You would now just add these cards that you have left over to your new starting cards. Once you have collected all your cards, you can place them next to your floorboard. With all those resources in your hand, let me show you how you can buy and add all those beautiful wooden pieces to your board. It's time for the building phase. To start this phase, you first determine the starting player. For the first round, this can be any player. In later rounds, this will be the player who was last to pass in the previous round. Beginning with the starting player, players take turns in a clockwise order. On your turn, you carry out one building action, or if you cannot or don't want to carry out a building action, you must pass and drop out of the round. Once all players have passed, the building phase ends. Before I explain how to build a wood element, it might be a good time to show you all the wooden elements in a bit more detail. These are all wood elements. The goal of the game is to assemble all these wood elements into ornaments. A completed ornament always consists of one frame, one midsection, one core, and one table. And this is also the order in which you must build your ornaments, always starting with a frame and then adding pieces from the outside to the inside of the ornament. Once you have placed a table at the center of your ornament, that ornament is now completed. These ornaments must be connected to each other using these connectors. Because new connectors can only be placed adjacent to frames, and frames can only be placed adjacent to connectors. Let's see how this works when we actually start building, because the building phase is split into 4 steps. First, you will have to pay for an element using your material cards. Then you will be able to build that wooden element, and then you will check if you can claim a tool or take any new material cards during the third and the fourth step of this building phase. Let's start with buying a wood element. During the game, you can use this handy reference sheet at the back of the rulebook to see how much each of the wood elements costs. When you have chosen a wood element, you pay its cost by playing material cards from your hand and placing them in front of you. The rule for paying with cards is that you have to pay for a wood element by using cards that match the color of the ornament that you are building. As you might have already noticed, only the frames have one of the 4 material colors. The midsection, the core and the table, they have their own color. When you want to buy a midsection, a core or a table to add it to an ornament, you will have to pay with material cards that match the frame's color. So if I want to buy this midsection and add it to a yellow frame, I will have to pay with yellow cards. But if I want to add this midsection to a red frame, I will have to use red cards. Buying a frame costs you 1 material card of that frame's color. So here, 1 yellow card. If I want to add this midsection to this frame, I will have to pay 2 yellow cards. For a core section, I will need to pay 3 cards of the matching color. And for a table, you will have to pay 4 cards of that ornament's color. If you don't have the right number of cards of a matching color, then there are 2 ways to deal with this problem. You can use these wild cards. 1 card can be used as one of the 4 material colors. Or you can always trade 2 cards of any color to use them as 1 card of another color. And you can even combine these 2 methods. So instead of paying 3 yellow cards for this core element, I could instead pay 1 yellow card, 1 wild card, and then 2 cards of any color to replace the 3rd card. The last wood element that you can buy is a connector. They will cost you 4 material cards of 1 color of your choice. Of course, you can also use wildcards and make trades to pay for this cost. After paying the cost, you place the cards that you used in front of you and you take the wood element from the supply. The number of wood elements that you can buy is limited. If a wood element is no longer available, you can't buy it. Frames are especially scarce. For this reason, it's important to know that you can never buy a wood element that you can't build on your board. Now that you bought a wood element, it's time to place it on your board. Each ornament starts with a frame. On your board, you can see that there are dedicated spaces for all the wood elements. For example, you can clearly see the shape of this frame and its color, and these have to match. During setup, you already placed a connector in the center of the floor, and frames can only be built adjacent to a connector, and connectors can only be built adjacent to a frame. So right now, at the start of the game, I have one connector, so I can only build frames. Around this connector, you can see that you can place a red, a yellow, a green or a violet frame. Remember that each color also has a matching icon that you can use instead of the colors. Once you have built a frame to start a new ornament, you can first add a midsection, then a core, and then a table to finish that ornament. Now that you have placed a wood element on your board, it's time to check if you can claim a tool from the toolboard. During setup, you filled this board with tool tiles. There are 6 tools. Each tool has its own column. On a tool tile, you can find a point bonus, a tool type, and a requirement. Each column is made up of 4 rows of tiles of that tool. Each row has a requirement that matches one of the 4 colors: yellow, red, green, and violet, each time involving 1 or 3 ornaments of that color. After building a wood element, check whether you meet the requirements of any tool tile on the toolboard. You meet the requirement if your floorboard includes all the ornaments shown. Whether or not any of these ornaments include more wood elements than required. But here that's not the case. I have matched this pattern, this ornament pattern, so I am now allowed to take this tool tile. And I place it next to my player board. If I would now during a next round build this wood element and add it to this yellow ornament, I would now match this tool's requirements. I have these 2 ornaments, and even if there's already a core piece inside, this doesn't matter for this tool tile, as long as you have this minimum configuration. So again, if you meet the requirements, you can take that tile and you place it next to your floorboard. You will place tool tiles that you acquire next to tool tiles of the same type. This is very important because each time when you take a tool tile, you get to score that tile. If you already have other cards of the same tool type, you can add those to your points. So just a moment ago I took this tile, this would give me 2 points. But when I now take this tool tile, I can add it to this row of identical tools. And it would not only score me 2 points, but I can add those 2 points to the points of any tools that I previously acquired of the same type. So here, by taking this tool tile, I would score 4 points. The 1 point tiles have a wooden top, the 2 point tiles have a silver top, and the 3 point tiles have a golden top. If you forget to claim a tile, you may claim it on your next turn if it is still available. If you would also claim another tile at the same time, make sure that you score them in the order in which you have met the requirements. If you play a 3 or 4 player game, there will be spaces on the board that have more than 1 tile on them. However, you can only claim 1 tile of that type. So if you already took this saw tile, you cannot take another one of that same type with those same requirements. Each time when you score points, you move your score marker along this score track. If you ever reach 50 points, You take one of these 50-point markers and you place it in front of you. If you would do this again, you can flip your tile to the 100-point side. During the fourth step of your building phase, you will check if you can take any new material cards. First, you return all the cards that you played when buying that wood element to their matching material deck. You now might be able to take new material cards. Just like with the cost for the wood elements, it's a good idea to use this handy reference sheet at the back of the rules. Depending on which type of wood element that you build, you might be allowed to take new material cards. If you have built a frame section to start a new ornament, you don't get any rewards. If you added a midsection to this red frame by paying the cost, you can now take one material card from the decks, but you can never take a card of the ornament's color or a wild card. So here I could take a green, a yellow or a violet card. If I also add one of these core pieces, paying its cost to add it to this red frame, I can take two material cards. But the same rules apply. You cannot take any cards that match with the color of the ornament or a wild card. If you add a table to your ornament or you build a connector, you get a special reward. Let's see how this works. By now you already know how to pay and build a table and a connector. But after building a table or a connector, there is a special reward. You may now move this reward marker on the reward track 1 or 2 spaces in a clockwise direction. You then take the material cards that are shown on that spot. In most cases, like here, it clearly shows you which card you're allowed to take. I can take 3 violet cards. If, however, you stop at this location, you can take 2 cards of the same color and then 1 card of another color. You may not take a wild card when using this space, but one of the 2 colors that you use may be the same color as the color that you use to pay for an ornament. Let me now show you a complete turn in which I can combine these 4 steps of the building action. We are in phase 2 of the round, and that's the building phase. It's my turn, and this turn I want to add this table to a yellow ornament. So, step 1 of the building phase, I pay for the wood element. It's a table, so I need to pay 4 cards matching the ornament's color. This is yellow, but I only have 2 cards. I'm still missing 2 yellow cards, but instead of 1 yellow card, I play a wild card. And for my last yellow card, I use these 2 colors, a red one and a green one. I can trade these 2 cards and use them as if it were a yellow card. After I paid for the element, I place those cards in front of me on the table. And it's step 2 of the building phase, so I can now build this table and place it in the center of this yellow ornament. It's step 3, so now we check if we can take a tool tile from the toolboard. I do have a match. For this tile, I needed a completed yellow ornament, and that's what I just did. So now I take this tool and I place it in my supply. Since I already have a tile of that same type, I can place it next to it, and this would now score me 2 and 2, 4 points. So I can add those 4 points to my point total, 1, 2, 3, 4. During step 4 of the building phase, I will now first place all the cards back on the appropriate stack, and then I can check if I'm entitled to take new material cards. Since I took a table, I can move the reward tracker on the reward track and take cards accordingly. I really want to work on this green ornament, so I now move the reward tracker 2 spaces, because this places me here on this spot where I get 2 green cards and 1 wild card. When it's your turn and you cannot or don't want to carry out a building action, you must pass instead. When you pass, you place your starting hand card in the resting area together with any other starting hand cards. Then you check the number of cards that you have left in your hand. You have to return any material cards to their stack until you only have 3 cards left in your hand. After all players have passed, the building phase is over and you can move on to the conclusion phase. During this phase, you will first score points for your connectors. At the end of the first round, you score 1 point for each connector that you placed on the board. At the end of the second round, you score 2 points for each connector, and at the end of the third round, you score 3 points for each connector. After each player scored their connectors and adjusted the position of their score marker, you can advance the round marker to the next space on the round track. Now the player who was the last to pass during the building phase takes all the starting hand cards from the resting area, chooses one to use during the next preparation phase, and then, in clockwise direction, each of the other players also take one of the remaining starting hand cards. Of course, if you are at the end of the third round, you will no longer choose a new starting hand card. You would then move on to the final scoring. During this final scoring phase, you will score for all the ornaments on your board. When you look at the scoreboard, you can see how many points you score for an ornament. This depends on how many wood elements you have added to each of your ornaments. You score 1 point for a frame on its own. For a frame and a midsection, you score 3 points. If you also added a core to the ornament, you get 7 points. And if you have completed an ornament, that scores you 12 points. So here I would get 3 points for these 3 frames on their own. I would then score 3 points for this ornament that has a frame and a midsection, that's 6 points. I can then add 7 points for this ornament that consists of 3 wooden pieces, so I now have 13 points. And then I have 3 completed ornaments, each one scoring me 12 points, so that would be 36 points. 36 and 13 adds up to a final score of 49 points. Now that you know how to play the game, I can introduce you to the B side of your player board. The B side offers a more challenging variant. These 4 connector spaces can no longer be built upon. They now show you plants and a number of bonus points. On top of that, the other spaces where you can place a connector now also have a color. So instead of paying with 4 identical cards of a color of your choice, you now have to use the color that is indicated on the board. At the end of each round and at the end of the game, you score points in the same way like you do on the A side. But now you have a chance at the end of the game to score these extra points. For each plant that you have completely enclosed, you score 10 points. A plant is completely enclosed if the 4 adjacent ornaments and the 4 adjacent connectors in its corner have been built. For this scoring, it doesn't matter how many wood elements are in your ornament. So, a single frame ornament also counts as an enclosed part of the plant. This is all you need to know to set up and play Intarsia. If you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you want to follow Meeplecare, you can do so on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. This was Meeplecare, taking care of your meeple needs.